My name is Dorothy Kane. I'm 63 years old, a retired naval intelligence officer, mother of one, and now, well, I guess you could call me a woman who's seen too much to believe in accidents. For most of my life, I've been trained to read patterns, decode lies, and spot inconsistencies in hostile territories. But nothing in my military career prepared me for what unfolded at my own dining table on Thanksgiving Day. It was a cold, crisp Thursday, and I had spent the entire morning preparing dinner by myself. My back ached from standing too long. My hands were red from peeling, chopping, and scrubbing. I wasn't hosting a lavish feast, just a modest meal made with care. A turkey breast for 3 cornbread stuffing and my late husband's favorite sweet potato casserole recipe, which I still make every year more out of ritual than joy. At 5:27 p.m., I heard Garrett's car pull into the driveway. He drives one of those electric SUVs that barely makes a sound, but I always hear it. It's a mother's thing. He walked in with that easy smile of his, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire month's pension. Behind him, as always, was Celia, his wife of 4 years. Hair perfectly curled, boots clicking across the hardwood lips, painted in some shade of polite indifference. Garrett hugged me, and I clung to him a second longer than I should have. "Smells amazing in here, Mom," he said. "Celia, take off your coat. You're going to love this." She smiled, tight and practiced. "It already feels like home." I bit my tongue. We sat down, the candles flickered. The conversation was light at first: company updates, investor meetings, their new nutritionist, her yoga retreat. Then, as I was spooning cranberry sauce onto my plate, Garrett looked up from his turkey and asked a question that sliced through the air like a wire. "Mom, did you like the beach house I gave you?" I froze. The spoon clattered onto the plate. "What beach house?" Garrett blinked. "The one at Cape San Blas, 2 years ago. I had it deeded in your name. Remember, Celia helped organize the paperwork." He chuckled. "I figured you'd finally get to relax by the water like you always wanted." My chest tightened. I stared at him. "I never received a house, Garrett." He looked confused. "Wait." What? Celia placed her fork down, slow and careful, like she'd practiced this exact moment. "Maybe the paperwork didn't arrive, Dorothy," she said calmly. "There were some issues with mail forwarding last year. Remember, you even mentioned it yourself." I turned my head toward her. My voice was steady. "I didn't mention anything like that. Ever." She blinked once, then smiled again. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I wasn't. And suddenly, every part of me trained to pick up the microsignals of lies and danger was wide awake. I didn't touch the rest of my food. I couldn't. My hands rested gently on the table as I watched Garrett pull out his phone. I already knew what he was doing, scrolling through his email, searching for confirmation for files he thought I had seen and signed. Across the table, Celia watched him too, her eyes darting from his face to mine and back again. Her posture stiffened by a hair. Not enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. Then she looked away. That's when I knew. She didn't try to help him search or clarify anything. Instead, she reached for her wine glass. The hand holding the stem trembled slightly. "Garrett," she said suddenly, interrupting the silence. "Didn't your assistant send the deed to the P.O. box? The one you updated after your mom told us her old mailbox got broken into?" My voice remained calm. I've never had a mailbox break-in, nor have I ever used a P.O. box in my life. Garrett frowned. "Wait, you didn't ask me to change the mailing address 2 years ago?" "No," I said simply. "I didn't." Celia's smile faltered. "Just barely." And that was the second time in under 5 minutes that her story shifted. She pivoted fast. I could have sworn you called and thanked us last November. Remember, you said something like, 'I can't believe I have my own place by the sea now.'" I tilted my head, my gaze never leaving hers. I spoke quietly but firmly. "I think you're mistaking me for someone else. Or you're mistaking the story you rehearsed for the one that's true." Garrett looked between us, baffled. "Celia, you said you handled the paperwork with my assistant." "I did," she replied quickly. "You were in Munich that week. You told me to take care of it." Remember, I could see the wheels turning in Garrett's mind, recalculating. But he still wanted to believe her. And that right there is what manipulators count on. Confusion, doubt, politeness. I took a slow sip of water. My hands didn't shake. Across the table, her eyes locked with mine. That's when I saw it. The subtle collapse. A shift behind the eyes. The tiniest curl of her lips, not from confidence, but from fear trying to wear a mask. The shrew's mask had finally slipped. And I didn't flinch. Because while I didn't have a deed or a key or $1 of the money my son had been sending, I had something far more powerful. I had questions, and I intended to follow them all the way to the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the family my son had built because someone else had used my name to build it. With shaking grace, I stood and cleared my plate as if nothing had happened. But inside, the mission had already begun. And this time, the battlefield was my own dining room. After they left that night, I washed the dishes alone. I didn't need to. There weren't many. Garrett had barely touched his mashed potatoes. Celia sipped her wine and excused herself early, claiming she had a headache. But the silence they left behind was louder than any slammed door. It was a quiet I had grown used to. My home is modest, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a kitchen that hasn't been remodeled since the early 90s. It smells faintly of lemon cleaner and old paperbacks. I keep everything tidy. I always have. Discipline never left me even after the uniform did. Some mornings, I still fold my sheets like I'm on base inspection. I live alone. Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference one most people don't understand. My husband passed 11 years ago from pancreatic cancer. He died quietly, holding my hand, wearing the same watch he'd worn since our wedding. I didn't cry at the funeral. I was too busy making sure everything went as he would have wanted. After he passed, Garrett became my entire world, or at least the part that still had color. He was brilliant, ambitious, always thinking 2 steps ahead. He built his company from nothing, just like his father built his life after the Navy. But somewhere along the line, he started calling less, visiting less. I told myself it was natural. That's what sons do when they grow into men. They chase their own futures and assume their mothers are fine. And I was fine. I kept busy. I joined a gardening club. I volunteered at the Veterans Center twice a week, mostly to help the younger ones with their paperwork. I even took a watercolor class, though my instructor politely suggested I stick to landscapes and avoid people's faces. Still, even with these things, something about Thanksgiving night hit different. Maybe it was the look in Garrett's eyes when I said I'd never received the beach house. The flicker of confusion, the immediate pivot to doubt. Like he needed to double-check his own memory because mine couldn't be trusted. That stung more than I expected. After cleaning the table, I made a cup of tea. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no milk, and sat on the couch staring at the family photo on the mantel. Garrett was only 12 in that picture, standing between me and his father at his middle school graduation. My uniform was pressed metals, polished hair, and a perfect bun. I still remember that day. He'd gotten an award for excellence in mathematics. We took him to Dairy Queen afterward. I used to believe service earned you respect. That a woman who dedicated 20 years of her life to protecting her country would naturally command a certain level of honor in her own home. But now I wasn't sure if that uniform meant anything at all. Because now I was just Mom. The woman who made turkey once a year. The one who sent polite birthday cards and didn't ask questions. The one they assumed would never notice if something was off, like a beach house mysteriously missing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something much deeper was buried under Celia's polished smile. Something calculated, intentional. And I couldn't sit still knowing there were pieces that didn't add up. Old habits die hard. Before I went to bed, I pulled out the metal file box I keep beneath my dresser. It holds every tax return, every insurance statement, every copy of correspondence I've ever received from Garrett's office. It took me 34 minutes to go through it. There was no deed, no transfer, no notice of title, not even a generic congratulations letter. But I did find one thing, a white envelope sealed but never opened, postmarked from Tallahassee. No return address. I remembered it arriving 2 years ago around my birthday. I assumed it was another advertisement or sweepstakes gimmick. For some reason, I never threw it out, just tucked it away like everything else. I placed it on my nightstand. Then I turned out the lights. And as I lay there in the dark, I wasn't thinking about the missing house, or the missing money, or Garrett's confused expression. I was thinking about the calm. That quiet, creeping calm that comes right before a mission. Because something was wrong. And I was trained to investigate everything that doesn't feel right. I didn't open the envelope from Tallahassee right away. Instead, I sat on my bed with the metal file box in my lap, letting the edges dig into my thighs. My fingers traced the label on one of the older manila folders, Garrett's college tuition receipts. I still had them, as if keeping proof of sacrifice somehow mattered more than the sacrifice itself. And then, without warning, a memory pushed itself into my mind, uninvited but sharp. It was the first dinner I ever had with Celia. Garrett had brought her over a few weeks after their engagement. He'd been glowing proud like a boy showing off a perfect science project. She wore a pale blue dress, her dark hair swept into a low chignon, and she brought a bottle of wine with a label I'd never seen. She complimented my meatloaf, said it reminded her of her grandmother's. I thanked her and smiled. But there was something rehearsed about the way she spoke. Not unnatural, just precise, polished. Like she knew exactly when to laugh, when to nod, when to lean in and say, "That must have been hard for you." After dinner, Garrett excused himself to take a call from his CTO. That was when it happened. Celia and I were sitting in the living room. I was gathering some documents for Garrett old insurance forms he needed to update a joint policy. I placed the folder on the coffee table, then stepped into the kitchen to rinse the dessert dishes. It was no more than 90 seconds, but when I returned, the folder had been opened. Celia sat there flipping through the papers, not quickly, not sneakily, just reading. She smiled when she noticed me. "I hope you don't mind. I used to work in claims processing before law school. Can't help but skim a few pages." I remember feeling something strange in that moment, not exactly anger and not quite discomfort. Just a tickle in the back of my mind, like static building up before a storm. She tapped one of the forms and said, "You know, Dorothy, these beneficiary lines are all outdated. You should let me help you organize some of this. Garrett's too busy, and I'm good at these things." I laughed lightly and said I'd think about it. But I didn't say no. That was the start of it, wasn't it? The shifting of small responsibilities, the casual offers to streamline my financial mail to digitize my bill tracking. She even once set up autopay on my gas and electric accounts, which I only found out about when the paper statements stopped arriving. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about erosion, it's slow, unremarkable. You don't notice the cliff is crumbling until the last piece falls into the ocean. And now, years later, I couldn't say with certainty which decisions were mine and which ones I had let Celia make for me. That terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Was I so eager to be helpful, so desperate to be low maintenance, that I handed her the keys without ever asking where she planned to drive? I stared at the photograph on my nightstand. Me in uniform, standing next to Garrett at his officer training graduation. I looked firm in that photo, unshakable. But the woman in bed that night didn't feel like the same person. The worst part. There were gaps in my memory, conversations I wasn't sure I'd ever had, phone calls I might have dreamed. I remembered Celia once saying, "You told me that over coffee last spring," and I hadn't corrected her because I honestly couldn't recall whether I had or hadn't. I didn't want to believe I was losing clarity. But the mind doesn't raise a flag when it starts letting go. It just leaves you with blank spaces and the unsettling realization that someone might have been writing in them for you. That's when I understood what had truly been taken from me. Not just money, not just a house, but certainty. And that made me angry, not in a screaming, flipping tables kind of way. I'm not built for that. No, my anger is quieter, more disciplined. It turns inward like a compass needle pulled toward a destination it doesn't yet recognize. That night I set the Tallahassee envelope aside and made a new folder, one I labeled in ink questions Celia cannot answer for me. Inside it, I placed a single sheet of paper. At the top I wrote, "When did I stop being the one who managed my own life? I didn't know yet, but I intended to find out." The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't open the blinds or make coffee like I usually did. I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed in one search term that hadn't left my mind since Thanksgiving dinner. Property deed Cape San Blas. Plus Dorothy Kane. Nothing came up. No listings, no ownership records, no tax documents. I refreshed the page and tried again with different variations. D.E. Kane, Dorothy Elaine Kane, even Dorothy Kane without the E. Still nothing. I switched over to the Bay County Property Records database. It was clunky, but I knew how to navigate systems like that. I searched through the last 3 years of residential title transfers in Cap San Blas. Dozens of names, dozens of properties. None of them were mine. I felt a dull tightness in my chest. Not from fear, but from the cold certainty that someone had scrubbed me out of a place I was never allowed to enter. It was time to call someone. The law firm Garrett used to rely on Everett and Braddock had handled our family paperwork for years. I still had their number saved on a notepad by the kitchen phone. I dialed. Everett and Braddock, this is Tasha. Hi, Tasha. My name is Dorothy Kane. I'm calling to ask if there are any recent deeds or property transactions listed under my name. My son Garrett may have initiated something on my behalf. It would have been in the last 2 years. Certainly, ma'am. Let me check. Her tone was warm, efficient. I waited. The line crackled faintly. I'm not seeing anything under that name, ma'am. Could there have been a different spelling? No, I said softly. There's only one way to spell my name. She hesitated. Sometimes clients use a trust or LLC to handle real estate. Do you know if your son filed under a different entity? I didn't. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still in my chair. I looked around my home, the picture frames, the curtains, the tidy bookshelves, and realized that for years I'd trusted too many things to operate in the background. I thought if I wasn't being called into the center, that meant things were running fine. Now I wasn't sure if I'd been left out or erased. That's when I remembered the envelope. It had been sitting on my nightstand for 2 days ever since I pulled it from the old file box. Postmarked from Tallahassee. No return address. Slightly yellowed along the edges. At the time, I dismissed it as junk, maybe another pre-approved credit card or some scam offer. The kind of letter you throw out with the coupon booklets. But this one, for some reason, I hadn't thrown away. I walked back to the bedroom and retrieved it. The flap was sealed. The glue had held all this time. I sliced it open with the edge of a letter opener. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. I unfolded it slowly. It wasn't junk mail. It was a copy of a property deed. The header read, Quitclaim Deed, State of Florida. The grantee listed Dorothy E. Kane. The grantor Garrett R. Kane, Cape San Blas. Lot 37. There was a notary seal at the bottom, but something about it looked off. The ink was faded, almost like it had been photocopied too many times. The signature that read Dorothy E. Kane was mine, supposedly. But I'd never signed that paper. My hands didn't shake as I read the rest. Not from shock, not from confusion. They stayed still because this was familiar. I had seen forged intelligence documents in the field before. Fabricated supply requests, altered manifests, doctored field orders. The sloppiness in the signature spacing. The slight upward slant in the forged E. The absence of my usual loop in the letter D. They weren't trying to fool a handwriting analyst. They were trying to fool someone who wasn't supposed to look too closely. I stood there for a long time holding the paper like it was evidence at a crime scene, which I realized it was. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't a lost document or a delivery error. Someone had transferred a property using my name. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had gone out of their way to ensure I would never know. And that someone had likely eaten my pumpkin pie 2 nights ago. That envelope had no return address because it was never meant to be traced. But it reached me anyway. And now that it had the silence, they counted on my politeness. My age, my absence from the system was over. I folded the deed, returned it to the envelope, and tucked it into the front of my file box. This time not for storage, for evidence. Because the house I never saw was finally visible. When I left the military, I swore I'd never dip a toe back into that world. Not for favors. Not for memories. And certainly not to feel important again. But the moment I held that forged deed in my hand, one name came to mind, Walt Kendrick, codename Midas. We'd worked together for a year in the early 90s during a NATO data sweep in the Balkans. He was with the NSA. I was embedded from intelligence coordination. He was brilliant with patterns, data paper trails, encrypted records. But even better, he was trustworthy. The kind of man who stayed off social media, who didn't answer calls after sunset, who still used a rotary lockbox for his important documents. I still had his number. I didn't call. I showed up. Walt lived in a quiet part of Southern Virginia, now a little cottage off Route 17 surrounded by pine trees. I arrived just past noon. He was on his front porch sipping something from a tin mug. He didn't flinch when he saw me, just raised an eyebrow. Dorothy Elaine Kane, he said, standing up. Still alive, still defying retirement. Walt Kendrick, I replied. Still allergic to sunlight. He chuckled, then led me inside. We talked over tea. I told him what had happened at Thanksgiving. Garrett's questioned my blank reaction, the silence from Celia. Then I pulled the envelope from my bag and handed it over. He read it carefully twice. Then he asked a single question. Have you ever signed anything with a notary present in the last 5 years? No, I said. Nothing that wasn't medical. He nodded, his lips pressed in a hard line. Then this is bad, Dorothy. Because it means someone created a full legal profile of you, signature, ID number, notary info, and used it to transfer property under your name, then scrubbed all paper trails that could point it back to you. That's not a family prank. That's high-level identity manipulation. My stomach tightened. I need to know what's real. I need to know if there are other properties, other accounts, anything that exists in my name that doesn't belong to me. Walt tapped his fingers on the table, then got up and disappeared into another room. I heard the creak of a safe, the thud of a binder being opened. He returned with an encrypted laptop and a thumb drive, plugged it in. The screen lit up with code I couldn't follow, but he could. If there's something out there with your name on it, he said, I'll find it. He worked silently for 15 minutes. Then he looked up. There is a property. I leaned in. It's not in Cape San Blas. It's in Sarasota. 2-bedroom condo, transferred in your name. But get this, it was later sold under your signature again. Money went into a trust fund, not yours. So this has happened before I asked. Walt gave a slow nod. That's what I'm saying. This isn't an accident. This is structured, calculated, rehearsed. And Celia. He gave me a long look. Someone's operating like a ghost through your identity. And that kind of ghost always has a human handler. I sat back in my chair, suddenly aware that I'd underestimated the problem. This wasn't about a beach house anymore. This was a war. And my name was being used as a weapon. 2 days after our conversation, Walt called me. His voice was low, controlled. But I could hear at the edge, that sharp glint of something serious. Dorothy, he said, I found the beach house. I gripped the phone tighter. In Cape San Blas. Exactly there. Ocean View property. Registered under the name Dorothy E. Kane. Deed was notarized in Miami. The tax record is clean. But the mailing address associated with it. It's a rented P.O. box in Tallahassee. That's 200 miles away. Exactly. Rented under a generic alias. Paid in cash every 6 months. Surveillance camera outside the postal center is too low res to help. But here's the kicker. Your name, your ID number, your digital signature, all over the bank documents, connected to this property. I felt my knees weaken. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the sunlight through the blinds. There's a bank account, I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. Walt hesitated, then answered. Account at a local credit union in Florida. Opened online, verified with a notary code stolen from a closed real estate firm. The account has been receiving deposits of $6,000 monthly for 18 months. I did the math. That was over $100,000. All routed through ACH from an LLC in Delaware, he continued. That doesn't exist beyond the paperwork. Fake names, fake addresses, shell company. The paper trail ends in smoke. I pressed my fingers against my temples. So someone has been collecting money in my name through a fake mailbox tied to a fake trust with real signatures. And spending it, Walt said. The funds were drawn down, regularly transferred to another account belonging to a woman named Miriam Voss. That name rang a faint bell. Miriam Voss, I asked. Why do I know that name? Walt didn't answer right away. Then he said she's Celia's cousin, technically. Married name, not Voss by birth. But she's been residing at that beach house officially since last summer. Utilities in her name. Cable. Even the local vet listed her cat as a resident there. My stomach turned. How long have they been doing this? I whispered. I don't know, he replied. But long enough to get comfortable. I stared at the wall. The photo of Garrett on his graduation day hung slightly crooked. In it, Celia stood beside him, smiling, her hand on his chest. My hand. Not in the frame at all. Walt spoke again. Dorothy, listen. What they're doing is federal-level identity fraud. If it goes to court, they'll go down hard. But you need evidence that you were unaware of the transactions, that you never consented, that you were being used. I finished for him. He didn't deny it. I sat still for a moment longer, then stood. My joints ached, but my focus was razor sharp. I had spent a lifetime leading soldiers, handling encrypted communications, extracting truths buried under lies. But now I was a mother, a widow, a woman who lived alone in a quiet neighborhood and waved at mailmen. They thought I'd forgotten who I was. They were wrong. I would not let my name be sold. Not by a woman who smiled too easily, and not by a son who no longer saw me. They'd mistaken my silence for weakness. They would learn the difference. Walt sent me the scanned document the next morning, no subject line. Just the file and a single message. Page 3, bottom right. I opened the PDF, already feeling the prickling behind my eyes. The document was crisp, clean transfer deed for the Cape San Blas property, bearing the official stamp of a notary in Florida. The name Dorothy E. Kane sat proudly under the owner section with a date 18 months prior, and there it was, page 3, bottom right. My name, in ink, in looping cursive, almost, but not quite. I enlarged the image, adjusted the brightness, zoomed in to the highest resolution. Then I pulled open my filing drawer, reached into an old manila folder labeled Estate Planning, DC, and took out a photocopy of my last notarized signature. I laid them side by side. At first glance, they looked nearly identical. But I've seen too many field forgeries in my time to be fooled by symmetry alone. A real signature has rhythm, organic flow, imperfect pressure. The kind of thing that can't be copied, only mimicked. And here it was mimicked. The D in Dorothy too angular. The loop in the H missing entirely. And most telling of all, the swoop under the C in Kane, that little flourish I'd added since age 16, was flat. Dead. A lifeless reproduction. I took a breath. Calm. Controlled. Then the memory surfaced. A faint one, but vivid now that I needed it. 2 years ago, Celia had stopped by with a cake from that overpriced bakery downtown. Pink frosting, gold letters, Happy 70th, Mom D. It wasn't my birthday, not even close. But she laughed it off and said she wanted to celebrate early, just in case our schedules didn't match up later. Then she asked me to sign a few greeting cards for the neighbors she claimed. One for her parents, one for an old professor, one for a keepsake book I'm compiling for Garrett. She handed me a stack of cards and a thick envelope already pre-sealed, asking me to sign the insert. She stood behind me as I wrote, pressed close. I remember the pen, thick barrel, heavy. I remember feeling a twinge of discomfort at how closely she watched. And now I understood why. She didn't just need a signature, she needed a specific one, in isolation. One that could be lifted and printed onto legal forms. One that wouldn't raise suspicion in court. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my spine. Celia hadn't stolen from me blindly. She had planned it. She had built a timeline. Created the illusion of kindness and closeness, all for the purpose of harvesting a moment. A moment where I let my guard down. Trusted her. Smiled as I signed a blank piece of paper tucked between pre-signed cards and carefully curated laughter. I scrolled through the rest of the scan. There were initials too. DEC scrawled on page 2. I never abbreviated my name that way. Never had. That was her mistake. I took a red pen and circled it. Twice. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt not sadness but clarity. It wasn't just about a house anymore, or even the money. It was about my name, my signature. My identity weaponized by a woman who saw motherhood as a weakness and took advantage of the one bond I held sacred, my son. I reached for my phone and called Walt. Can you do handwriting analysis, I asked. He didn't hesitate, already started. I've also flagged the notary ID. The woman it belonged to died 6 months before the document was stamped. A forged signature, a dead notary, a cake that wasn't for my birthday. It all made sense now. This wasn't just fraud. This was war. I wore my best pressed shirt, a neutral shade of navy, and a scarf tucked smartly into the collar. Something about blending in but still commanding attention. It's what I used to wear on reconnaissance trips, and this one was no different, except I wasn't gathering intel for a mission abroad. I was here on American soil, asking about a house that was legally mine, but emotionally stolen. The real estate office in Apalachicola was small but tidy. A bell chimed as I stepped in, and a young woman with curly brown hair and a face that reminded me of every sweet Southern girl I'd met in my service days smiled and rose from behind the counter. Hi there, welcome to Bayline Realty, she said. I'm Rebecca. How can I help? I introduced myself using an old alias, Judith Erickson, one that had no digital footprint and no ties to Dorothy Kane. I told her I was interested in buying a coastal property near Cap San Blas and had heard good things about a certain house that had recently changed hands. Oh, you must mean the Spanish-style one with the coral shutters, she said, pulling up a listing on her screen. That's been off-market for about a year now. The owner doesn't live there full-time, her family uses it as a vacation home. I played along, asked questions about rental history, tax implications, resale value. Rebecca answered them all professionally, her fingers tapping away at the keyboard. Then I asked something carefully rehearsed. I heard the house was a gift, family transfer. Something like that, she nodded. Yes, I believe it was a gift from the son to the mother, though there was some confusion about the bank account at first, but it got sorted quickly. I tilted my head. Confusion. She hesitated just for a second, but that second told me everything. Well, I wasn't part of the original transaction, she said. But I do remember Celia Garrett's wife called in and gave us a different account number than what was on file. I kept my voice light. Oh yeah, she continued, lowering her tone slightly. She told us not to bother Garrett about it, that she'd handle everything. She said, and I quote, Garrett doesn't need to be looped in. He's busy enough. Just use this routing number instead, and I'll manage the rest on his behalf. I sat back in the chair, folded my hands in my lap. My heart thumped so loudly I was sure Rebecca could hear it. I smiled. Sounds like she's efficient. Rebecca chuckled. Oh, she's more than efficient. She's a machine. Kind of scary, honestly. But hey, things got processed. No flags raised, so it must have been fine, right? I thanked her for her time, left with a brochure tucked under my arm, and made it halfway to my car before I stopped and leaned against a tree. So that was it. Celia hadn't just intercepted money or manipulated paperwork. She had orchestrated the entire illusion from the very beginning. She had provided the new account, likely the one receiving those $6,000 monthly payments, and made sure Garrett remained in the dark. She didn't ask him to trust her. She simply removed him from the equation. She didn't just lie. She engineered a vacuum. She filled that vacuum with just enough administrative help to make herself indispensable, and she made sure no one asked too many questions, especially Garrett. My son had been kept busy with board meetings, travel deadlines, and Celia quietly, methodically told the rest of the world to leave it all to her. I had never given her power of attorney. I had never authorized her to speak on my behalf. But no one ever asked. And now, 2 years later, Garrett likely believed I had that beach house, that I was living in quiet comfort while he built empires. He had no reason to suspect anything, because she made sure of that. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I whispered out loud, You never gave me a reason to doubt you, Celia. But now I can't remember why I ever trusted you at all. The road stretched ahead like a long, unraveling thread, and I was ready to follow it. Walt called me just after 6 a.m. He never called unless it was urgent or unless he found something that made his spine itch. Dorothy, he said, you might want to sit down for this one. I'm already sitting, Walt. Shoot. I ran a satellite surveillance pull from our private feed. Nothing too invasive, just patterns traffic coming and going around the Cape San Blas property. Been watching it for 10 days. And there's someone living there, full-time, not Garrett, not Celia. Older man, consistent schedule, takes out trash, picks up mail, even waters the damn succulents. My breath caught. Do you have a visual sending you stills now? A few seconds later, they appeared in my secure inbox. Grainy black and white, but clear enough. The man walking across my porch with a green watering can was around 70, lean, with a full head of gray hair and a certain slouch in the way he walked. Not military, not familiar, not mine. But the next image caught my eye. Same man, different day. Holding a keyring, unlocking the door. He wasn't just staying there, he lived there. And whoever he was, he had keys. I emailed Walt back, asked him to ID the man. Walt didn't take long. His next message read, Name, Ronald Madsen. DOB, 0421, 1953. Retired electrician. Current address, Cape San Blas, your property. Relation to Celia, biological father. I stared at the word biological. I had only met Celia's mother once at the wedding rehearsal, never met her father. She had said he died of lung cancer a few years back. So either that was a lie, or she had two fathers, one of them secret. Walt, I called. Why the hell would Celia lie about her father being dead? Can't say, he replied. But I also checked the bank paperwork. The account receiving those $6,000 deposits, the one tied to your name. Yes. There's a secondary access user on file. Power of attorney notarized 3 years ago. His name's Ronald Madsen. My stomach turned. You're saying the man living in my house also has legal access to the account created under my name? Yes. As your authorized agent, and the signature forged, but close enough that no one blinked. I stood up, hand gripping the back of the kitchen chair so tight my knuckles paled. So this wasn't just Celia pulling strings behind the curtain. This was a family operation. She had used her father, a man I had never even met, as a placeholder, a proxy, a shadow wearing my legal identity. He'd been collecting monthly transfers, living in the house I never saw, possibly receiving mail as Dorothy Kane. And it had all been authorized on paper. Except none of it came from me. That house wasn't just a stolen address. It had become a stage. And the man playing me wasn't me. He was her blood. He was her accomplice. And suddenly the entire game changed shape. I set the table myself. Nothing fancy. Just a roast chicken, roasted carrots, a decent bottle of Merlot, and a pecan pie from the bakery down the street. Simple, homey, exactly the kind of meal I knew Celia wouldn't be able to resist controlling. She was always managing plates, napkins, appearances. Tonight she didn't lift a finger. Garrett sat across from me, his eyes sunk in his mouth drawn into a flat line that barely moved all night. Celia sat to his left, perfect posture, linen blouse, buttoned to the neck, wedding ring glinting like a badge of loyalty. Her father, Ron, hadn't come. Claimed he wasn't feeling well. I knew the real reason. Celia didn't want to risk another set of lies collapsing. I passed the carrots. Garrett mumbled a thank you. Celia cut her chicken with care, but didn't eat much. No one spoke for minutes. Then I reached into my sweater pocket and placed the recorder in the center of the table. Small, black, blinking red. What's that? Celia asked, her tone forced, cheerful. Garrett looked up. Something you both need to hear. I clicked play. The audio was clear. I'd run it through software Walt recommended to scrub the background noise. What remained were voices, hers and Ron's, crisp as broken glass. It began innocently. A clink of forks, a chuckle. Then Celia, Garrett's easy. All you have to do is seem organized. Like you're helping. I told him, your mom's not good with online banking. He didn't even question it. Ron and the house title. She never asked Celia no. She thinks it's still hers. Honestly, she's so analog. Just needed her signature once she thought it was for a birthday card or some insurance update. I looked at Garrett. His hand froze around his wine glass. The recording continued. Celia, quieter now. We needed the house. You needed a place, Dad. She wasn't using it. And Garrett would never say no to me. He's not like her. He doesn't question things. Ron laughed. She's tough. Like a boot camp instructor. Celia, exactly. But she's tired now, lonely. I just needed to smile, call her mom, and bake a pie every few months. A sharp intake of breath, Garrett's in real time. He turned slowly to her. You said all that. Celia didn't respond. Her jaw tensed, but she said nothing. I hit pause. The file is time-stamped, 2 months ago. Recorded through a secondary device placed by a friend, someone who still works in signals intelligence. Celia blinked. Her voice was thin. You recorded me. No, I said. But someone else did, because they knew I wouldn't believe what was happening unless I heard it. And because they still respect a veteran being manipulated by her own family. Garrett stood. He looked, broken eyes darting between us, mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find where to begin. Celia, is this true? She reached for him. Garrett, please. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I was trying to help my father. He was struggling. I thought no, I said, rising slowly. You didn't just help your father. You stole. You lied. You forged documents. You rerouted federal payments. You exploited an elderly woman's trust. I didn't mean to. I cut her off. You filed for power of attorney with a forged signature. You redirected monthly survivor benefits from my late husband's pension. You took the property title. You falsified a mailing address. You made your father a financial proxy using my name. And you used your marriage as a shield. Garrett stared at her like she was a stranger. You used me, he whispered. No, Celia said, standing now, trying to reach him. I love you, I do. I didn't know what else to do. My dad, he needed help. You never had time. And your mom, she was always judging me, always so distant. I thought I could make it work if I just kept it together, if I made things look okay. Her voice cracked. I never wanted to hurt you. I placed a stack of documents on the table. IRS forms, case numbers, confirmation of receipt. I've already filed reports with the ERS, the FBI's Elder Fraud Division, and the Treasury Department's Office of Financial Crimes Enforcement. This goes beyond family betrayal. It's federal, it's criminal. You don't get to smile and say oops at this level. Celia collapsed into the chair. Tears streamed silently down her face. I didn't think she'd ever find out, she whispered. I walked toward her, not with anger, not even with triumph, with finality. I trained as a signals officer, Celia. I ran recon in deserts where satellites failed. I survived cold wars in hot zones. I buried a husband and raised a son while you played dress-up in my living room. She looked up at me, helpless. You thought I forgot how to fight, I said. But I never did. I just waited for the right battlefield. Behind me, Garrett broke down. Not loudly. Just a sound, a cracking sigh that echoed in the stillness. You broke everything, he said. Celia sobbed. But I didn't reach for her. Not this time. Not ever again. This wasn't a war for forgiveness. This was a reckoning. And I wasn't finished yet. Garrett didn't sleep that night. I knew because I didn't either. The house was quiet after Celia left, stumbling out in tears, her voice hoarse from begging her heels in one hand, her coat forgotten on the stair rail. She had asked to talk tomorrow, but Garrett didn't answer. He just stood there, still in the clothes from dinner, staring at the now silent recorder on the table, as if it might speak again. The next morning I found him in the garage, not fixing anything, just sitting on the old workbench, shoulders slumped, a blank legal envelope in his hands. He didn't look up when I entered. I called my lawyer last night, he said. Told him to draft a legal separation agreement. I nodded. Garrett turned the envelope over once, twice. Then he looked at me, really looked. His eyes were red, but not from sleep. There was shame in them, and something I hadn't seen in years, clarity. I should have asked questions, Mom. I should have paid more attention. You were trying to tell me, and I kept brushing it off. I let her use your name like a pawn. I'm so sorry. I walked over and took a seat beside him on the bench. For a long while, I didn't say anything. Finally, I rested a hand on his back. You loved her, I said. You thought you were building something real, he shook his head. But it wasn't. It was a script, a manipulation, and I let her write every scene. He handed me the envelope. I didn't open it, just held it. She'll fight it, he said softly. She'll cry. She'll call it hormones or grief or family pressure. But what she did, it wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. I didn't disagree. That afternoon, Celia came back. I opened the door. She stood there on the porch wearing a gray cardigan that looked too large for her frame and clutched her phone like it was a lifeline. Her eyes were puffy. She didn't wear makeup for once. She didn't need it to look fragile. I need to talk to Garrett, she said, voice barely above a whisper. He's here, I said, stepping aside, but be prepared. She walked in slowly, like someone walking into court. Garrett was in the living room. He didn't stand when she entered, just sat there with the envelope on the table in front of him. She saw it. Her lip trembled. Please, she said. Please don't do this. Garrett's voice was calm. I already did. Her breath caught. Garrett, she whispered. I'm pregnant. Silence dropped like a curtain. I closed my eyes. Garrett stiffened. She stepped forward, hands over her stomach. I wasn't going to say anything yet. I just found out last week. I thought maybe we could fix this, that there was still something worth saving. Garrett was frozen, but I wasn't. I stood between them and said, a child is not a shield, not for theft, not for betrayal, and certainly not for fraud. Celia turned to me. You don't believe me, I looked her dead in the eyes. I don't believe in timing that perfect. Garrett rose finally, his face unreadable. If it's true, I'll take responsibility. I'll do what's right for the child, but I'm not staying in a marriage built on lies. Tears streamed down Celia's face. I was scared, she whispered. My dad, he needed help. I didn't know how to stop once it started. You didn't want to stop, I said. Garrett picked up the envelope and placed it gently in her hands. Give this to your lawyer. I already signed it. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. And then she left. This time, she didn't look back. The next morning, I took the folder I'd built, every photo, every email. The forged signature overlays the bank records Walt had traced, and placed it in front of Margaret Elwell, the only attorney I ever trusted to look me in the eye. She adjusted her glasses, flipped open the file, and whistled under her breath. Dorothy, she said, this isn't just fraud. This is identity theft, wire fraud, real estate misappropriation, federal. I nodded. I want it reported to every agency that matters. She met my eyes, brows knitting. This could get messy. You ready for depositions, for court appearances, for the press, if it goes public? I was a military intelligence officer for 25 years, Margaret. I've walked into rooms that didn't guarantee walking out. I'll handle it. She cracked the smallest smile and started scanning the pages with purpose. Later that day, I met Walt at the old diner we used to call the debrief booth. He had already ordered coffee and was scribbling on a napkin with that same impatient scrawl he'd used back in Afghanistan when we mapped out intel routes under pressure. I talked to an old friend at the IRS, he said, without greeting. Gave him the basics anonymously. He said they'd be very interested in the offshore wire trail tied to that fake account. I gave him a tired smile. You don't have to keep digging. He took a long sip of coffee and said, I want to. If you need a forensic statement or testimony about the chain of custody on those scans, I'll do it. Put me under oath. I reached over and touched his hand. Thank you, Walt. He nodded, and we sat in silence. It was the kind of silence that meant respect. That evening, Garrett came over. He didn't say much, just brought groceries and helped me make dinner like when he was 12, and we used to try to cook without burning the pot roast. He didn't sleep in the guest room that night. He slept on the old couch in the living room, with one arm over his eyes, like the weight of everything had finally caught up. The next morning, he made eggs. I told the board I'm taking a leave of absence, he said over breakfast. I need time. I need to fix some things. Be here, with you. I didn't respond immediately. I just passed him the salt. But inside, something loosened. Something that had been knotted for too long. I didn't need him to make it right, but I was glad he wanted to try. The sky over Cap San Blas was softer than I remembered. Or maybe I had never really looked at it before. The sand carried the scent of salt and faint traces of wild rosemary, and the breeze moved like it had secrets. I stood at the threshold of the house I legally own now, thanks to Margaret, the county court, and the mountain of evidence we submitted. But it didn't feel like mine, not yet. The keys Garrett gave me clicked in the lock with a reluctant twist, as if the house itself had grown used to keeping me out. When the door opened, the air inside was still staged. It smelled like lemon cleaner and something artificial, maybe the remnants of whoever had tried to make it theirs. The sunlight filtered through gauzy white curtains, casting long shadows across the floorboards. The space was beautiful, a vaulted ceiling, a stone fireplace, pale hardwood floors. The kind of place that should feel like peace. But as I walked in room by room, all I could feel was something else: violation. The living room was arranged with meticulous neatness, navy cushions, fluffed coffee table centered. But the books on the shelf were staged by color. The family photos in the hallway weren't of my family, and above the mantel, where perhaps someone had once placed a wedding portrait or a framed diploma, hung a generic canvas print of a sailboat. The kitchen was worse, drawers labeled in marker. Cutlery, foil, tea. An index card taped inside the spice cabinet read, Celia, don't forget garlic powder, Dad's favorite. That's when the tremor hit, a ripple in my chest like something misaligned. I placed my hand on the counter to steady myself. I had never cooked here, never laughed in this room, but somehow it had been filled with memories, just not mine. Every detail in this place was curated around a fraud, around her. I found a folder in the office drawer, bills addressed to Dorothy Kane, all forwarded from the Tallahassee P.O. box. It wasn't just a name stolen. It was a role, a whole life assumed and played out in rooms I'd never seen. I opened the back door. The breeze rolled in stronger here. The sea was just beyond the dunes. I could hear it, not roaring, just a steady hush, like breath. I stepped outside. The backyard was overgrown but quiet, wild with tall grass, and a single swing hanging from the branch of a tree I didn't recognize. and it hit me I didn't want to erase the past. I just didn't want to be haunted by it. The next day I came back with garbage bags, gloves, and a mindset I hadn't worn since my service days. I stripped the house down room by room, drawer by drawer. The white cushions were the first to go. The labeled index cards followed. I tore down the sailboat painting and leaned it against the trash bin. The photos I didn't throw away. I stacked them in a box labeled Evidence, Celia and Ron. Margaret said the IRS might still want more documentation for their case. By dusk, the walls were bare. The home finally echoed again. I stood in the center of the empty living room, and for the first time I heard it breathe. The only item I kept was a clock. I found it tucked in a closet behind a broken lamp. A wooden wall clock oval with the initials DC faintly carved at the bottom edge. It was old, dusty, but it ticked. Even now, after everything, it still ticked. I cleaned it gently with a cloth and hung it in the kitchen. It was the only thing in this place that had my name on it before the fraud began. The next morning, Garrett arrived with a pot wrapped in burlap and twine. A tree, I asked. A live oak, he said. They're slow to grow, but they're strong. I thought maybe, for the yard. He was trying, not in grand apologies or dramatic gestures, but in small, deliberate acts, like this one. We planted it near the back corner where the sunlight would hit strongest by mid-morning. Garrett dug most of the hole himself. I steadied the sapling, pressed the soil down around its base. You know, he said, brushing dirt from his hands, you were always the strong one. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to comfort him. Instead, I looked at the tree. This one's going to need time. Roots don't take overnight. He nodded. We sat on the porch as the light faded. I didn't invite him to stay. He didn't ask. But before he left, he looked back at the house and said, "It feels different now." "It should," I replied. "For the first time, it's real." After he left, I stood inside again alone. I lit a candle, not for ceremony, just for light, and watched the flame reflect in the kitchen window. The clock ticked behind me, steady as a metronome. And for the first time in months, I let myself breathe into the stillness. Not everything could be restored, but some things like dignity, like truth, could be reclaimed. The sea was calling in the distance, steady, relentless. This house didn't hold my memories, but maybe in time it could hold my peace. It's early. The sky is turning amber just beyond the waterline, and the gulls are beginning their morning songs. I'm sitting on the front porch of the house I never saw until I did. A cup of green tea rests in my hand, warm against the breeze. The sea smells clean like promise. A year has passed. 12 months since I sat across from Celia and Ron at that dinner table and pressed play on a recording that shattered every illusion. 12 months since Garrett signed the separation papers and planted a live oak in my backyard. Since Walt testified to federal agents with a spine of steel, and I stood in a courtroom not to seek revenge, but to restore my name. I've told no one this story until now, not in full, but this morning feels like the right time. The house is quiet, the world is still, and peace, real bone-deep peace, has finally made a home in my chest. Celia went to trial. She served a reduced sentence in exchange for a full confession and testimony against her father, Ron Madsen, who had a long list of financial deceptions predating even her marriage. Garrett was granted annulment on the grounds of fraud and mental manipulation. He's rebuilding slowly, thoughtfully, and we speak sometimes mostly about books or old songs we both forgot we loved. I didn't keep the money Celia funneled through my name. Every dollar was seized and returned or redirected to legal costs. The house, though, that stayed with me, because in the end it wasn't about real estate. It was about truth, identity, dignity, about a woman who'd been told gently then cruelly that she didn't belong in her own life. I kept a journal throughout the legal process, notes, questions, frustrations. It helped me sort through the mess of betrayal and bureaucracy. But after the hearings ended, I stopped writing until last month, when I found a letter in my mailbox. It wasn't from Celia. It was from her father, a 3-page handwritten apology. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just context. Just a few lines about how he'd lost his way after his divorce, how Celia had tried to please him since she was little, how she believed for a time that marrying into our family was her redemption. I didn't cry reading it. I didn't rage either. I just sat still, my hands folded over the paper. 2 weeks later, I wrote back. It was a short letter, less than a page, No warmth, no hatred, just clarity. I am not your confessor, I wrote, but I do believe in consequences. You and Celia both have met yours. I will not be part of your rebuilding, but I also will not be an obstacle to it. My silence from this point forward is not indifference, it's intentional peace. I never heard from him again. The clock in my kitchen still ticks. The one with the initials DC. Garrett helped me polish the wood and rehang it after the repaint. Sometimes I catch myself staring at it, not to check the time, but just to feel grounded. The oak tree out back is growing stronger. The roots have taken. I water it every other day, and when the sun hits its new leaves, I remember that life, real life, doesn't apologize for taking time. I've hosted neighbors here since, not many, but enough to bring laughter into these rooms again. Some knew about the scandal, some didn't, but none of them asked intrusive questions. People have a way of sensing when a story doesn't need to be poked, only honored. I've also started teaching again, just a few hours a week at the community center. Veterans who want to write, widows who never learned email, teenagers who are better at math than at understanding why stories matter. It's quiet work, and I love it. Sometimes I walk the shore alone before sunrise, like today. This porch, this view, this quiet morning, it doesn't erase what happened. But it reminds me that what was stolen can be reclaimed, that names can be cleared, that dignity once buried can rise again. Celia once tried to steal my future, but in the end, I was the one who chose how to use it. I chose peace. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.